Hello ladies and gentlemen, hope you guys are well, and today I want to share the most effective study technique. I get this question almost every single day within the lives. What is the most efficient study technique? How do you study? How do I optimize my time? And by sharing my experiences as well as some scientific backed study techniques, you guys can kind of formulate an answer. But to give a short answer, whatever technique works, whatever works, you have to constantly refine it, and you will eventually end up with a system that works best in your favor. But of course, you should be open-minded about looking into scientific backed like study techniques, and kind of be willing to incorporate some of these techniques. But as long as the system works, just prioritize on how to make it more efficient and being aware of the kind of the blind spots that you might be missing. But yeah, I wrote down a couple of notes that I'll be sharing with you guys. But I'd like to first start off with kind of my experience with the US education system. I personally think that the US education system doesn't care whether you have a real deep understanding of a certain concept. There's many times where I just memorize formulas as well as concepts, and I just regurgitate information just for quiz and exam sake. But this is not really how I want to approach learning in the long run. In the long run, I really want to constantly challenge myself and increase the retention, as I believe that an educated person is someone who has a deep understanding of the material and is able to utilize that knowledge in order to solve problems in the real world. But I'm not at that state, but I'd love to get to that point, and thus this is why I want to kind of navigate through this path with you guys. But yeah, let me first also share my study technique currently. My current study technique is active recall through practice exams. So I'll give you an example for a math course that I was taking. I would go to lecture, and usually I have a notebook, and I try to take down as many notes as possible. Sometimes I would copy down the slides and by the way, before describing some of these study techniques, recognize that I am not a master of any of these. There are some inefficient study techniques such as rereading, taking down, rereading your notes. There's actually quite a lot I wrote down. Rereading, rewriting notes, and there's others that's not really efficient, but I utilize them because it gives me it makes me feel productive, and it keeps me engaged in terms of trying to focusing my attention to the professor while the lecture is being held, instead of just trying to passively understand what's going on, because I have to be doing something, and that cognitive energy, that cognitive strain is utilized when I'm actually physically doing something. So that's the reason why I'm taking physical notes within the class. I know some people they might not take notes whatsoever, but for me, I personally enjoy taking down notes. So I would go to these lectures. I would go to my math lecture, write down formulas and concepts, and then I would come home and I would usually do problem sets. Problem sets is probably the best way for me to test what I know. And if there's something that I don't understand, I would usually go on Google or YouTube, look at the lecture notes and kind of see what I don't know and try to utilize that information into the problem set until I could hopefully get to a solution. And there's times where I just don't get the solution and it's reflected within the exam, but it's okay. It's you need to recognize that to put in the effort to try to seek the answer. But yeah, I would say that that's my current process, and I know this is varying for, especially if you're studying English, if you're studying psychology, biology, chemistry, engineering, computer science. It's probably all very different, but still I hope that some of these insights and sharing the research back studies could give you an understanding of oh, this is pretty intriguing, I want to try this out. And now I want to share 4 proven study techniques, and there's probably a lot more, but these were the ones that I consistently found throughout my research. And the first one is active recall. And active recall is forcing your brain to retrieve information. And this would include activities such as mind mapping and quizzing yourself. Any of these activities where you're forcing your brain to regurgitate information or just retrieving information counts as active recall. And for me to share and highlight the importance of active recall, let me introduce you to the Ebbinghaus model. And this model pretty much states that memory decays exponentially over time. And according to this book, Effective Study from Mr. Robinson, he stated that at the end of 2 weeks, the average student could only recall only 20% of what he knew immediately after reading. And what was recalled was only 53% right. So this kind of explains, this curve explains that our brain is actively trying to make us not remember things. And thus, in order to prevent this, we need to constantly kind of prime our mind to this information. And experiments have also shown that if you memorize repeatedly within 1 hour, you will remember for 1 day. If you memorize 1 day, you will remember for 1 week. And so the best way to combat the learning curve is to constantly put in practice. Number 2 is the SQ3R method. This method was proposed by the educational psychologist by the name of Francis P. Robinson in 1946. And the book that we just mentioned, which was Effective Study, was written by Francis Robinson. And you might be wondering, what is the SQ3R? It sounds intriguing. And what it's an acronym. It stands for survey, question, read, recite, review. Yes, yeah, those are the 5 things that it stands for. And let's kind of guide you guys are probably already doing this subconsciously, whether you recognize it or not, but it's really good that it's laid out in a process, like in a physical acronym. So as survey, the first step is to pay attention to obvious elements such as headings, bolded text, or available charts. And this is the survey method is like the first skim, and this first skim will kind of allow us what will be presented in the text. The next step is question. We want to generate questions about the context of the text, and we want to frame questions in terms of asking what, who, why, and how. And we want to kind of make sure we read the keywords from the survey that we did and turn them into questions. And after we've done survey and question, we move to the 3 R's. The 3 R's including read, recite, and review. Read is with the background that we've kind of gathered from the survey and question phase, we try to answer these questions by reading actively. And what do you mean by read actively? So we're trying to answer the questions that we have already kind of curated in the earlier process. And we want to write our thoughts down within the margins, underline things that we don't understand, or even key points. The next step is recite. Recite could also be intertwined with recall or retrieve, and this means that we're trying to rehearse the answers of the initial questions that we have asked. And last but not least is review. We want to redefine our mental organization and kind of begin to build that memory. And this could include quizzing ourselves or taking exams. And we don't want to make quiz or an exam like a bad thing. Of course, like usually within a school setting, it holds significance because it allows you to get closer to your goal of maybe it's a certain career, certain job, your personal satisfaction. But quizzing and exams that you do voluntarily, it shouldn't be really like a negative thing. It should kind of you should take of it as a way of recognizing how the spots that you don't know, revealing your blind spots. And if you constantly are taking quizzes and exams, then when the actual event occurs, then you're going to be much more prepared, and you're going to be aware of all the dragon flames and all the the things that are going to be thrown at you, the curveballs. But I mean, even when you do a lot of quizzes and exams, there might be times where you get hit out of the blue. And it seems like one of my pages was not printed out, but the last method is, well, actually, yeah, there's 2 more methods. 1 second, I'll be right back. All right, where were we? Right, number 3, the spaced repetition technique. And this pretty much goes hand in hand with active recall and another essential component to combat the Ebbinghaus model. And the Ebbinghaus model, as we discussed, it's kind of over time, we know that memory kind of decays without practice. And this is where spaced repetition comes in. And every day, or not every day, but even intertwined intervals, we want to constantly practice the concept, the formula, whatever material that we want to ingrain within our brain. And this can be done through physical flashcards or digitally through apps such as Anki or Quizlet or any other spaced repetition apps that you guys are aware of. And again, the German psychologist Hermann Ebbinghaus hypothesized that the speed of forgetting is dependent upon a number of factors such as the difficulty of the material, representation, and other factors such as stress and sleep. And so sleep is also a huge component of measuring how well you're going to perform. So make sure your basic needs are always met when deciding to study as well. And he also concluded that the difference in performance can be explained by mnemonic representation skills. And with spaced repetition, the more you remember with more frequent learning. And another research talking about spaced repetition showed that additional study trial provided opportunity for the learner to interact with material and to acquire the potential meanings it embodies to a structure of knowledge he partially or completely missed in the first trial. And the second benefit was that another study trial provides learner with informational feedback for testing the accuracy of knowledge acquired in the first trial. So it's a really good way of kind of measuring how much of the material that you have retained. And last but not least is the Feynman technique. Most of you guys know the great physicist Richard Feynman, and he was really well known for his great lectures and how he had this ability to dispense information so articulately and so fluently to his students. And yeah, very humorous as well. And so the Feynman technique kind of explains that if you cannot explain it to a 6-year-old, then you probably don't understand what you're talking about. You want to be able to share the information as simple as possible. And this could include, before I include what a Feynman technique would look like, let me give you a little quote about the efficacy of Feynman technique. According to an experiment where students were tested between self-explanation and no self-explanation for concrete practice problems, the results were 90% or better. However, for abstract transfer problems, concurrent self-explanation group hit an accuracy of 90%, whereas no self-explanation group achieved a 28% accuracy. So, Feynman technique, learning how to express certain hard concepts and digest it in a way that it could be understood to even a 6-year-old. I think that's a pretty important technique, being able to teach it to others. And the importance of self-explanation involves having students explain some aspects of the process during learning. And this means that it helps them support the integration of new information with the prior knowledge that they had. And I kind of want to give you an example of me trying to use the Feynman technique. And the example concept I wrote down was the law of diminishing marginal returns. All right, so I have an extra piece of paper and I'm going to be demonstrating the law of diminishing marginal returns. So let me draw it out really quick. We're going to be drawing a graph. First, the x-axis as well as the y-axis. And on the top, I'm going to write the law of diminishing marginal. Marginal is additional. Just think of it as a synonym for additional. One more unit. Marginal. Law of diminishing marginal returns. Okay. And let's give an example that we are a tech startup in Silicon Valley and we have a limited office space of, let's say, around like 10 people, for example's sake. And on the x-axis, we want to put inputs. And then on the y-axis, we're going to have outputs. Okay. And then I'm going to have my function, our production function, include the inputs, which is going to be, for example's sake, we're going to make some assumptions. And this is what I'm learning currently. The assumption is that we're going to have capital and labor. And what do you guys think about a tech startup? What is what input is very valuable? Is it capital or is it labor, employees? I would go with the latter, right? Because in a tech startup, you want specific knowledge, and we're not really working in a manufacturing industry. We want people who are specialized in programming or computer science related skill sets. So in the beginning of the tech startup, how do you think our graph will look like? Most likely increasing, right? So for when we're beginning out, let's say I am the sole person within the office building that's starting this tech startup. It would be really helpful if we increase more employees, right? And we're going to continue to increase, and our output is going to be increasing, right? Because we're a tech startup, and the more employees that we hire, we're hoping that the output is going to be greater. So we're going to be experiencing an increasing return in the beginning, and up to a certain point. After a certain amount of time, which is probably when the office is filled, then that's the point where we're going to be experiencing the law of diminishing marginal returns. So after we have 10 employees, we've maxed it out. For additional employees that we're going to be having, we're going to be experiencing a negative return on the more employees we try to hire. And so our graph is going to be experiencing a negative marginal return. And marginal is like for additional input that you gain, what is the output looking like? And so this is increasing, and then this is decreasing. And this point is the point of diminishing marginal return. Okay. So this is how it would look like. And this would be some type of function. Let's say like K plus L. I'm not too sure how the production function would look like for this example, but you kind of get the premise, like the gist of this law of diminishing marginal returns. So yeah, I feel like there were some gaps in my explanation that I definitely could be better at, more simplifying. But this is just an example of how you could utilize the Feynman technique within like your friend group, within even your family and friends. You could kind of be sharing these ideas that you learn. Maybe it's not as intriguing, but it will still allow you to reinforce the memory. And this could apply to any concept. But yeah, that was the techniques, the 4 study proven techniques. I definitely, once again, pulling a full circle back to the original question, what is the most effective study technique? I think the answer lies somewhere in the combination of all of these proven techniques and kind of testing out which one works for you. But the important thing is that you have to be actively kind of being engaged with the material. And at times it's really, we don't want to take quizzes. We don't want to put tests, at least for me, because I know the amount of effort it takes, and especially before an exam, I don't want to know that I don't know, but I believe that a lot of us overestimate like how much we truly know. That's called I believe the Dunning-Kruger effect. And to kind of combat that, we have to just put in the effort and to kind of force ourselves to be uncomfortable, and honestly more comfortable with uncertainty, because it gives us opportunity to learn. But in no way am I a master of all these study techniques. I'm still working on optimizing, being more efficient, but the number one goal is always to recognize, to build that discipline so that I could recognize that once I have this mentality, then I could kind of focus on the optimization and efficiency aspect. But yeah, I hope this video was insightful. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys later. Hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you guys later. All right, peace.